The third speaker for the motion is Professor Anthony Grayling, Professor of Philosophy at Birkbeck College, author of many books about philosophy, Berkeley, Wittgenstein, Russell, biography of Hazlitt. He also wrote a book called What is Good? The Search for the Best Way to Live Appropriately. And his new book is called Against All Gods. Professor Grayling.
When one gets up to speak this late in a debate, one's a bit tempted to quote that Hungarian MP who, after a long discussion in the Parliament in Budapest, stood up and said, everything has been said, but not everybody said it yet. And it's my turn. Some of you might have noticed the news item today about the Pope Benedict XVI, giving a sermon last weekend in Rome and telling the congregation, reminding them perhaps, that hell is a real place. It's a palpable, tangible place, and the eternal fires of hell really exist, and those who don't accept Jesus, he said, I'm paraphrasing here, will roast eternally, but because of their failure to do so. And this shows how very up-to-date Pope Benedict is, because obviously he's heard about tonight's debate, and this is an intervention. Although I've been trying to work out all day on which side it's an intervention. And is he trying to persuade you to vote, against the motion, or is he actually a fifth columnist on our side of the argument? Well, it isn't clear. Now, I imagine a Martian Ph.D. student. I suppose there are also Ph.D. students from Venus as well, but this was a Martian Ph.D. student who is studying the ethical systems on planet Earth, and has read all the documents, all the treatises, all the philosophical works, the scriptures, the teachings of the Holy Fathers, and has come to the point at which he's got to do some field work. And so he is beamed down by the Martian equivalent of Scotty to Waterloo Station at rush hour, so there are plenty of people about. And he falls into conversation with people having coffee, waiting for their trains. And he asks them a question, actually rather an astute question. He doesn't ask them what they think is right and wrong, good or bad, and why. Instead, he asks them this. He says, what kind of people would you like your children to be when they grow up? And he asks them this because he wants to get from them, to elicit from them, their very best thoughts about the best kind of life. And so he knows that he's going to catch them in a sober and well-judging frame of mind when they think seriously about what kind of people they'd like their children to become. And he finds, when he's talked to enough such people, that there's quite a consensus among them. They say things like this: I'd like my children to be responsible people. I'd like them to take responsibility for themselves, get an education, get a good job. I'd like them to have a family and friendships, deep friendships, because they're so valuable and enriching. And with their family as well, I'd like them to care for their children tenderly and carefully, and I'd like them to bring up their children to think for themselves and to take responsibility for themselves. I wouldn't want my children to be just always submitting to the authority of, a politician or a teacher. Or, I'd like them to be inquisitive and to inquire and to think for themselves. And then the Martian PhD student says to them, it's absolutely extraordinary that all you people say these things about what you want for your children, because this is nominally a Christian country, isn't it? I mean, and isn't it the case that even if you no longer actually believe the tenets of the Christian faith, you were sort of in the position of the young man from Moldavia? You remember that little poem? There was a young man from Moldavia who couldn't believe in the Savior, so he erected instead, with himself as the head, the religion of decorous behavior. And this was meant to be, deduced or inferred, at any rate, from the basis of Christian morality. But this nominally Christian country, says our Martian, how can it be that you've said what you said? It's astonishing. Because in the New Testament, you are taught to take no thought for the morrow. Consider the lilies of the field. Don't have a pension. Don't put money aside. Don't educate your children and help them to prepare for a future. Take no thought for the morrow. The lilies of the field don't, and yet you are not arrayed as these. Also, give away all your money, give it away to the poor, and follow me. Then you are going to, if you have possessions, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to get into heaven. The eye of the needle, well, we know how that's been glossed in the centuries since, but it just says It's more difficult for a rich person, a comfortably off person, to get into heaven and to pass through the eye of, than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. In other words, the teaching of the New Testament ethics, which I would submit to you is not bad as teachings of ethics go. It doesn't really compare to the great systems of Aristotle, let us say, or the Stoics, or of Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism is not a religion. It doesn't have any supernatural beings in it. It's a philosophy. Or of the moral outlook of the Enlightenment, or of some of the thinking about the good life, the well-lived, decent and responsible life today, none of which appeal to the existence of supernatural agencies as the source of a divine command. All right, it's not, the Christian ethical outlook is one of the better of those. And yet when you look at it and you see what it demands of you, it is very contrary to the way we think of a decent life now. And moreover, it says, I mean, I can imagine the Martian Ph.D. hearing from his interlocutors on Waterloo Station that they want their children to be happy. Happy, says the Martian Ph.D. student. I mean, it says, blessed are they who weep and mourn. I mean, don't you want them to be miserable so they can get into the afterlife? I mean, it looks as though there's such a radical inconsistency between one of the better religious ethical outlooks and what it is you want from your children, that it's very hard to know what to think about it. Because, after all, says the Martian, I've been reading all the documents. And as a result of reading them, I said to Scotty, the chap who beamed me down from Mars, I said, look, be very careful, won't you, about where I end up, both time and place. So I don't want to end up in Israel at the time of Moses, just in case they mistake me for a Midianite or an Amalekite or any of the others who were massacred. Please don't, make sure I don't end up in Spain in the late 15th century with Torquemada, or in Calvin's Geneva at the time he was burning Michael Servetus, or in Zwingli's Zurich when he was drowning the Anabaptists, or please not in today's Baghdad, Bombay, Beirut, even Belfast for that matter. Make sure you get me to Waterloo Station in 2007. Because when I'm not thinking about the better of the religious moralities in the Christian New Testament, gosh, really? I think about all these other teachings, I find that it is not simply a question of the teachings being very questionable, or not just a question of the practice allegedly based on those teachings, which is very questionable, but the entire assumption, the entire outlook about what it is to be a good person and to live a good and decent life, which is so at odds with the way we in our secularized modern Western liberal democracies have come to see as life of achieving and flourishing and doing well for others. And I end on this one note. Julia pointed out that, and so indeed did Nigel, that religion and its inspirations and the art it's produced and the rest have played a very important part in what you might call, and what I might, just speaking secularly, call the spiritual aspect of our lives, our emotional and intellectual responses, our enjoyment of beauty, our desire for love. And I mentioned this to you, as Hitch, in his eloquent intervention during that moment, was implying, those who don't have a religious outlook appreciate a fact about human beings, that for all their capacity for greed and unkindness and cruelty and the rest, they also have a remarkable capacity for the good, a deep sense of connectedness with other people and a desire to be connected with the world as a whole. You look at people in their gardens, or going for a walk in the country, or at a concert, or looking at pictures in an art gallery, and you see that you don't need supernatural agencies or religions or ancient scriptures to explain the fact that human beings are capable of good, and that most of the good that there is in the world has come from that source and not from some alleged supernatural source. Many thanks.